A training camp position battle is over before it begins, and your mailbag questions today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Thursday, July 28th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit that subscribe button. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. New episodes each day, Monday through Friday. Well, training camp is underway for the Jets. They had their first practice yesterday, and they made some news. A training camp battle, or at least something we've expected to be a training camp battle, is apparently over, according to Robert Saleh. The head coach announced that George Fant will be the left tackle for the Jets on opening day, and Mekhi Becton will be the right tackle, assuming everybody's healthy, of course. An injury could change things, but it sounds like Fant will be the left tackle, Becton the right tackle, a reverse of what we've had the last 2 years. The last 2 years, Becton has opened the season as the left tackle. Fant has played right tackle. Of course, last year in the opener, Becton got hurt on actually Zach Wilson's first touchdown pass as a pro. Fant slid over to the left side, did a really solid job. If you've been listening to the podcast over the last couple of months, you know that my feelings on this are kind of conflicted and in some ways kind of contradictory, because in some ways I really wanted to see a camp battle because I'm a big believer in competition. I'm a big believer in putting the best guy out there regardless of draft positioning. Part of me really liked the idea that Fant's getting an opportunity, that we're not just handing the job to Becton because he's a first-round pick. On the other hand, I kind of see where Saleh's coming from by announcing this before the beginning of training camp, because ultimately, if you have these guys battling in camp and the loser's going to right tackle, well, now you're flipping guys back and forth. You're not really getting continuity. You're not really developing chemistry on the offensive line in training camp, and that can be really important. I don't know that you want Becton and Fant constantly moving from the left side to the right side. I think you want them steady in one spot, getting used to playing with the guy next to them. I think that there's a real logic behind that, and Saleh kind of alluded to that yesterday when he explained his reasoning. He essentially said that they don't want guys moving back and forth. They want to develop some cohesion, especially on a new offensive line. I look at this from a couple other angles. Fant is entering the final year of his contract, and to me, this says really one of two things. It says either the Jets are really confident they're going to extend Fant, or it says that they think Becton's best spot is at right tackle. And why do I say that? And it's also possible that both of these are true. But why do I say that? Well, with Fant entering free agency, with his contract expiring after the season, unless he gets an extension, that would be a problem if he's the left tackle, because now you're creating a big hole at maybe the most important position on offense that's not quarterback. So the fact that they're putting Fant at left tackle rather than right tackle, that says to me either they're expecting to get Fant extended, or they just think Becton's better on the right side. And there's an argument to be made that Becton's final home was always going to be the right side. People said that since the day he was drafted because of just how big he is. Traditionally, and I don't know that this is necessarily a rule teams need to follow, but traditionally, your better run blocker is going to be on the right side of the line. I think that there's an argument to be made that when the Jets drafted Elijah Vera Tucker back in 2021, they envisioned him and Becton playing next to each other, dominating. Of course, their envision was for them to be on the left side together, but now you keep this duo together by putting them both on the right side of the line. So that's something that where maybe you're keeping these guys together. But ultimately, I don't think you'd want to do this if you were just going to create a hole on the left side of the line after this season. And yeah, I guess you could move Becton over to the left side after the season, but do you really want to do that? I feel like you don't. I mean, it's not the end of the world, and players have obviously been successful in league history moving across the lines at various points early in their career. But I think in an ideal world, if you believe Becton was your long-term left tackle, you probably wouldn't move him from left side to the right side, back to the left side in a 3-year stretch. So I think this means Becton's home's probably going to be on the right side at right tackle. And beyond that, the other thing I'd say is if Becton dominates at right tackle, I don't think you want to mess with that. I think that sometimes a guy finds a home at a certain spot on the line, and you want to keep him there, especially with him playing next to Vera Tucker. If they do develop into this dominant duo on the right side of the line, why would you want to mess with that? Wasn't the whole idea behind drafting Vera Tucker that these two guys are just going to open holes in the run game for years to come? So, and I go back to something I say frequently. In today's NFL, I still believe the left tackle position is more important than the right tackle position. But if you're looking at this saying, well, why did now the Jets have drafted a right tackle in the first round? I think you're behind the times. I think that's something you could have said 15 years ago. There was a point in time in the NFL where right tackle was not a premium position. I think those days are over. I think part of it is just due to how difficult it is to develop tackles in this league now. To me, you could almost justify using a high first-round pick on any position on the offensive line because it's just become really tough to develop guys. And part of that goes back to the schemes that college teams are running where they're not really working with offensive linemen to develop them in ways that'll help them in the pro game. It's really tough. So I think in that sense, right tackle is a premium position. I think also in the sense that you've seen adjustments through the years. And this is not a new development, but it's something that's become more and more prevalent. In the era where the left tackle was the dominant player on the offensive line, defensive coordinators, they're pretty smart. They figure these things out and they say, well, why don't I get my best pass rusher lined up against a right tackle since he's not as good? Well, now you're starting to see things move cyclically. You're starting to see teams make adjustments and they're starting to view right tackle as a premium position. If you look at the way teams are drafting, if you look at the contracts that are being given out, the guy who is most frequently complained about when we talk about the 2020 draft that the Jets did not take, Tristan Wirfs, has turned into a really good right tackle for Tampa Bay. So if you're coming at this from the angle that the Jets are making a mistake, they used a high first-round pick, a top 11 pick on Mekhi Becton, now he's only playing right tackle, I don't agree with that. I think that if Mekhi Becton turns into an excellent right tackle, he is well worth the pick. That pick is still a home run. If he's as good as advertised, I mentioned this yesterday, this is a guy with all the tools you need. If it clicks for Mekhi Becton, it's really going to click. We're looking at a guy with the potential to be as good as any offensive lineman in the league this coming decade. So I have no problem with this move. I do think it should be precipitated by either by a Fant extension. If not, then you got a little bit of an issue because now you're opening up a hole on the left side. And yeah, I guess you could move. Like I said, I guess you could move him. I don't think that that's the ideal way to do things. I get the pairing Becton and Vera Tucker together on the right side of the line. The one thing I don't necessarily agree with, Saleh indicated that Fant is more comfortable on the left side, and there's this school of thought that George Fant can play on the left side of the line, but he can't play on the right side of the line. I'm a little skeptical of that. Now, I know traditionally you want your right tackle to be a better run blocker than maybe your left tackle, but I don't know that the Jets are necessarily a better line with Fant on the left side and Becton on the right side. I think that's a bit up in the air. So I'll put it this way. Are the Jets a much worse offensive line if Becton's playing left tackle and Fant's playing right tackle? I don't think it's a Fant issue. I think maybe if the Jets think Becton's just better on the right side, then that makes sense because this Becton's going to be the guy who's here longer, you hope at least. So you really should be, and he's the guy with more upside. So I think your focus should be on optimizing Mekhi Becton. But Robert Saleh announces that the position battle, probably the biggest position battle the Jets have, is no more. So much for that camp storyline. Lasted all of half a day, I guess. And the Jets don't really have a ton of traditional position battles. They have some areas where you're not sure how much playing. Maybe one guy gets a little bit more playing time. Maybe one guy gets 60% of the playing time. Or maybe he gets 50% of the playing time. There aren't really a lot of open position battles. Maybe this would have been more exciting if the Jets had drafted somebody and Becton versus Fant was for a starting job and the loser went to the bench. But we kind of took some of the drama out of it. Now, I'm joking. I'm not complaining about it. But that position battle is no more. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll move to your mailbag questions. We're doing our weekly mailbag show today. Thanks to everybody who sent in questions. Among the questions I will answer is, who will win one of the few position battles, the kicking battle? We'll talk about that ahead here on this Thursday Locked On Jets episode. Training camp is here. You should treat yourself, and there's no better way to treat yourself than with a Built Bar Puff. And if you've had them before, you know what I'm talking about. If you're ready, you can have delicious, indulgent cookie dough. It's a new flavor. It's covered in chocolate. Built has done it again. I'm going to introduce you to this flavor. It's cookie dough chunk puffs. They have a light and chewy texture. They have real cookie dough chunks. And of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. It's all the joy of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. And it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunks are only 160 calories, and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. They are so good. I've tried them myself. These are absolutely delicious, just like all the other Built bars. And that's partially because they're covered in 100% real chocolate, so they're healthy and they're tasty. And they're chocolate-covered cookie dough with a light, fluffy texture. They are so good. I got to tell you, I love these when I tried them. Go to Built.com right now and order this or any other sort of Built bar and use promo code LOCK15. If you do that, you'll get 15% off your order. Again, it's promo code LOCK15, one word with no space, LOCKET, number 1, number 5, and you'll get 15% off at Built, BUILT.com for delicious Built bars. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. We're a daily podcast, new episodes each day, Monday through Friday, free and available on all platforms, talking about the New York Jets. Now let's move into our mailbag. Each week we do a mailbag show on this podcast. Usually we do it on Wednesday. That will be true once we get into the season. This week we moved it to Thursday because camp opened yesterday, so we had to talk about the opening of camp. But let's get to our mailbag. And our first question, John, between Pinheiro and Zuerlein, who do you think has the leg up in the kicking competition, and who would you prefer as the starting place kicker? I know Pinheiro does not have a big leg, but Braden Mann could handle kickoffs. Well, it's my head against my heart here because, as I've joked on the show, Eddie Pinheiro is my new favorite player. After 3 years, after the Jets let Jason Myers go, and a lot of futility in the kicking game, they get Eddie Pinheiro last year, late in the season, and they finally find a guy who could kick the ball through the uprights. And it's been one of the great frustrations of mine in the Joe Douglas era. There are lots of things I like that Joe Douglas has done. One of the things that he's been awful at is finding kickers, and it should not be as hard as he's made it out to be. Finally, late last season, he got Eddie Pinheiro. And you know what I liked about Eddie Pinheiro? He kicks the ball through the uprights. I think Joe Douglas has been too focused on getting guys who can kick it as far as possible, not focused enough on finding guys who can make field goals. Eddie Pinheiro finally made field goals last year. And, you know, I don't think his leg is as bad as people make it out to be because he did a couple long kicks last year. There's something about the way it comes off his foot. It just looks ugly off his foot. But if you just look down and look at the results, it's pretty good. And Braden Mann did do a good job with kickoffs when he took over those duties when Pinheiro stepped up to the Jets roster last year. So my heart wants Eddie Pinheiro because he's my new favorite player. My head tells me it's probably going to be Greg Zuerlein, in part because I think the Jets love, his nicknames. I've heard Greg the Leg, Legatron. He's got the big leg, but he's also got a track record of actually making kicks in this league. Good bounce back candidate. I think Greg Zuerlein's probably going to be the guy. That would be my guess, but my heart says Eddie Pinheiro. Of course, both of these guys are probably going to be on the team because with the expanded practice squad rules, which I assume will stay this year, the NFL is very odd that with their practice squad rules, because they announce changes very late in the calendar. Every time I remember the NFL announcing a change to the practice squad rules, it's been right before the end of the preseason when the practice squads are announced. But I think that the rules that came in back in 2020 because of the COVID season are going to stick. And those were rules that expanded the practice squads. In 2020, the league instituted this because of COVID. They wanted to make sure teams had enough players in case there was some sort of outbreak on their roster. So they essentially gave the teams a bunch of extra practice squad spots so they could call players up. I think teams like this, though. I think it's going to stay because it makes sense to just have extra players. And one spot that's always used on these expanded practice squad rosters are for a kicker, because sometimes you need a backup kicker. Sometimes somebody's not ready to go. So I think both of these players will remain members of the Jets unless somebody grabs one of them. I mean, listen, I'm an Eddie Pinheiro fan. Maybe some other GM's as big of an Eddie Pinheiro fan as I am. My guess, though, and this is like a 51-49 guess, but I tend to go with experience. So Greg Zuerlein would be the guy. It makes sense. And this was the type of guy I kept telling Joe Douglas to sign. Stop going for these unproven kickers with big legs. Get somebody who's proven he can make kicks in the NFL. But I'm going Zuerlein. That's my guess. Our next question. John, one area I think we have not addressed enough is the run defense. There were plenty of games last year where the Jets just got run over, specifically the Colts game. Who do you think shakes out as the run-stopping defensive tackle to replace Foley Fatukasi? And in the base defense, who do you think is the third starting linebacker other than C.J. Mosley and Quincy Williams? Additionally, in early down nickel packages, do you think they need to cycle in a linebacker who's a bit more of a thumper against the run? I can't help but feel part of the deficiency can be attributed to Saleh asking Mosley to drop some weight. There's a lot there. I think it's an open question because they didn't really replace Foley Fatukasi, did they? I speculated the other day maybe they think Jonathan Marshall can step up. The only guy who comes to mind for me, because even in the additions they made this offseason, they aren't really run-stopping types. I mean, they went for guys who were kind of undersized. I think Solomon Thomas is going to play some defensive tackle for them. Michael Clemens, the guy they drafted, is built more like an end, and there's talk he's going to play some defensive tackle. So, your guess is, unless it's Jonathan Marshall, your guess is as good as mine on this. I think this is one area where they have not done a great job. And I think that the only spot where they've really addressed it is the safety position, because they got Jordan Whitehead, who's a strong guy in the box against the run. And listen, I know Pete's got fans. I don't know why he's got fans, but I'm just going to say it. Replacing Ashton Davis at the safety position is going to help them, because he's not going to take whoever's playing there is not going to take as many horrible angles and turn 8-yard runs into 40-yard runs. Ashton Davis did that a lot last year. In fact, I actually did an article when I looked this up. If you just take the plays Ashton Davis messed up that turned into 30-yard runs, if the tackle is made where Ashton Davis should have made the tackle, you actually knock a full half a yard off the Jets' rushing average last year on the defensive side of the ball. So, I mean, I don't know that switching the safeties is going to do enough to help the run defense, but I don't really know. Now, as far as the question about who the third starting linebacker would be other than Mosley and Quincy Williams, and whether they need to put in a linebacker who's more of a thumper instead of nickel packages, I think that the idea is Hamza Nasruddin. He kind of started last year as a starter at the linebacker position. He's a former safety. And I mentioned this the other day. I think it's a situation where you're trying to get the best of both worlds, because as a safety, as a guy who has safety experience, he's going to be a better run stopper than a nickel corner would be. But as a safety, he's going to be a better pass defender than a typical linebacker would be. So I think they're essentially, they're not calling it big nickel, but I think they're essentially trying to go big nickel there. I think you'll see that on early downs if they can get away with it. So maybe that's something that'll help. But I think that I think Mosley and Williams, on most plays, you'll see one guy play the Mike and the other play the Sam. So I don't think that they're going to look for a bigger guy to complement them. I think that's the way the Jets are building this thing. They've drafted those two safeties last year, and they tried to sign Keon O'Neal to play the role for the safeties that they drafted. They wanted to sign Keon O'Neal, who was a lot of experience as a safety, to play a linebacker role. They wanted that will linebacker to be fast. So I don't think that they're big personnel changes. I guess they're hoping guys just play better this year. I mean, Quinton Williams did not have a great year against the run, so maybe some of the improvement will be internal. Jermaine Johnson, who they drafted in the first round, I don't know how much an end's going to help things, but he's a strong run defender. So it's a great question. I don't know that I think if there are certain areas where you can criticize the Jets for this offseason, that's one of them. I don't think they've done a great job against the run. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we will close out our weekly mailbag. We will talk Robert Saleh job security, we'll talk the run game, and we'll talk Joe Klecko. That's ahead here on this Thursday Locked On Jets episode. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question: are either Douglas or Saleh really on the hot seat going into the season? Do the Jets have to really finish at 500 or better, compete for a wild card spot for their jobs to stay safe? I would be extremely disappointed after another sub 500 non-playoff season, but I would be even more disappointed to see Woody clear house when it seems like for the first time in a long time there's competency in both the GM and head coaching roles at the same time. I do not think they're on the hot seat. I do not think they need to have winning records. I do not think they need to make the playoffs. I think they need to show improvement, but even then, I don't see them getting fired. I think that they will be here for 2023 at least. I would be really surprised. I mean, this is not a Jets team anybody's expecting to make the playoffs, so I think a playoff mandate would not be fair. I don't think the Jets have a playoff mandate. I think Douglas has sold the ownership on a long-term vision, so I don't see it happening. Now, listen, you could always have like one of these disaster seasons where you only win 2 or 3 games, and all bets are off if you have one of those types of seasons. And that would be alarming. Listen, I'm not going to lie to you. If the Jets are at the bottom of the league, if the Jets are picking in the top 5 again, then something's gone really wrong. Joe Douglas has done a lousy job in free agency in the draft, and Robert Saleh has done a lousy coaching job because, listen, this may not be a Super Bowl roster. This should be. They've had enough time and they've had enough resources And on paper, there should be enough talent. This is not a bottom of the league type team anymore. We need to see progress. There's always talk of the word rebuilding in situations like the Jets are in. The most important part of that word is the building part. You got to move forward. So I don't think that it's playoffs or bust. I don't think anybody's getting fired if the Jets win 7 games, but I would like to see progress. Nobody's ever, listen, in the NFL, nobody's ever 100% safe, but I think it would take one of those disaster seasons. It would take the type of 2 or 3 wins, the type of season where you really wonder, is this team on the right track? That's the type of season. I'm not even sure what would happen then, but that's the type of season where they could get fired. It's not going to be a case, though, they finish 8-9 where Saleh and Douglas are gone. I don't see that happening. Next question. On paper, the offensive line is shaping up to be a difficult matchup for opposition's defenses, along with a talented and deep backfield. Should the Jets be a run-heavy team? I think so. I think that's the way the team was built. I think if they were going to go more pass-heavy, you would have seen them approach the offseason differently. I think you would have seen them go out and get a veteran receiver. There were plenty of number 1 type receivers who were available on the trade market. Instead, what they did was, and I know they did try and get Tyreek Hill, but there were other guys they passed on. I think if the focus was on the passing game, you'd want a more experienced, proven commodity with Zach Wilson. I think instead what they did was they obviously went out and got an offensive lineman in Laken Tomlinson, who's a very strong run blocker. And they drafted Breece Hall. I think that shows you they want the run game going. They drafted Garrett Wilson, of course, but you can only expect so much out of a rookie. They're very young at the receiver position. Corey Davis of the starters is the only one of the 3 who's a veteran. I think they want these receivers to grow with Zach Wilson, and in a couple of years, they'll want Elijah Moore and Zach Wilson and Garrett Wilson to light things up. But I think the fact they went young at receiver and they focused on pieces in the run game, that shows you that they're going to be more of a run-focused team, and they're going to want the passing game to come along a little bit more slowly. Of course, they want things out of the passing game, but when you have rookies at we have a rookie at the receiver position, a second-year guy at the receiver position, and a second-year guy at quarterback, that shows that you're not really going to lean on these guys. And yes, I know there's a rookie at running back. For running back's a position where you actually can get immediate results because running backs tend to hit the ground running more so than guys at the other skill positions in this league. And our last question, when are you going to listen to your dad and write more articles about how Joe Klecko should be in the Hall of Fame? Yeah, that's one of the things my father always tells me. I need to write articles about Joe Klecko getting into the Hall of Fame. There was some good news this week. Joe Klecko did make the finalist of the senior committee. There are 12 finalists. 3 of them will be submitted to the full selection committee for consideration. Hopefully Klecko makes it. A guy who clearly deserves to be in the Hall of Fame if you're a student of history of this game. A guy who made the Pro Bowl at 3 different positions. Part of the sack exchange, threw up a 20-sack season back in 81. A guy who should be there. My focus right now is I'm actually writing an article about Joe Namath. So that's my focus right now. Maybe we'll get to Klecko after that. But yeah, my dad's always telling me I need to write an article about Joe Klecko, how he belongs in the Hall of Fame. And, part of this is I think the Hall of Fame needs to be redone. I think that the way that they do it, it leaves too many guys out. I mean, I look at these lists that they put out. I think practically all these guys belong in the Hall of Fame. So I think the Hall of Fame needs some reform, and I have some other thoughts on that. We'll get to that some other show. But that's all for today. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you enjoy the show, hit that subscribe button. You'll never miss an episode, as you'll get notifications as new episodes are posted. If you're listening on a podcast source, please a 5-star review. Helps us out tremendously, as does giving a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Have a great Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to close out the week.